Believe it or not, we just have 3 weeks left in Colossians, including this week. Then we'll be returning back to the middle of Genesis, where we left off a few months ago. By way of review here, remember some of the themes with me of Colossians, that Jesus Christ is supreme above all. There's none above him, none before him. The song says, all of time in his hand. He's created all things, and he is the preeminent one. He has first place. We have been associated with this King of Kings and Lord of Lords by his death and his resurrection. What a supreme privilege that is, that we would be found in Christ. And yet that is the truth that Paul presents in a very realized way through the book of Colossians, that we have been buried and we have been raised with him, as demonstrated by our baptism. And there have been many applications of those truths, haven't there been? That being dead to the old ways means that we would no longer adopt the practices and beliefs and habits of the old life. We would shed those. And it means that we would have a new thought, a new way of thinking, that our minds would be set on the very mind of Christ himself, that we would look above and not be so consumed with the thoughts of earth as we are the thoughts of heaven. But being associated with Christ not only affects what goes on in our minds, it affects what goes on in our members, with our bodies, our activity. And so we put off the old deeds, the deeds of the flesh. Those have no part in this new humanity that Christ has originated, is sustaining, and is the end of, is the head of. And so we put off in chapter 3, fornication and uncleanness and anger and wrath, all of that has been gone, and instead we're putting on the new man who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of Christ himself. And so our thoughts then turned in the middle of chapter 3 to what it looks like to put on the virtues of Christ. We examine him. We look to him. Who is he? What is his character? And he is full of tender mercies and kindness, humility and meekness, long-suffering. He's borne with us and forgiven us. And so we pattern our lives toward each other in those same ways. Right? We put on the virtues of Christ. So where does Paul go from here? Well, verse 17 was the last verse of the previous text, and it's helpful as a transition verse. He said, whatever you do, in word or in deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. This all-encapsulating net, too broad for any of us to escape at any moment in time with any thought or any deed. Everything is to be taken captive to worship Jesus Christ. And so he moves beyond this emphasis that he's had of the one another's, sort of across the aisle, right? Our neighbors, our brothers, side by side, this local church that we have living next to each other, walking in the new humanity together. And he turns his attention toward the household. That is verses 18 through chapter 4, verse 1. Wives and husbands, children and fathers, bondservants and masters, this household relationships. We'd call this a household code. It's how we should live, the code of conduct that we should live in our homes. And this concept is not exclusively religious by any means. Codes of conduct, instructions of household behavior, these are historically common, particularly because of the acknowledged centrality of the home to society. And so even ancient societies would have these codes of conduct for how households should live. And as we'll see today, their households were a little bit broader, even than we would consider our homes today, beyond the nuclear family, toward master-servant relationships, some of these extended relationships that they had in that time. We'll look a little bit more closely at that in a moment. So their households were a little bit broader, but this new humanity, this body of Christ that we've been considering, exists within the four walls of your home as well as within the assembled gathering. So his attention sort of turns there. And the point of this text is not so much the relationships between all the people, while we do spend quite a bit of time talking about that, right? How are husbands and wives to interact? How are children and fathers to interact? How are bondservants and masters to interact? That's important, but why they would interact in the way that they do is really the point of the text that Paul has for us today. So you can see pretty clearly, and it's one of those texts that just sort of unfolds in its pattern quite simply for us, that there are three pairs of relationships that are demonstrated in the text. Wives and husbands first, children and fathers second, and then bondservants and masters third. And even visually, you can see right away that the third one just sort of blows up, particularly the reference to bondservants. Consider why that may be in a moment. But those three pairs of relationships, what you'll see is that each one is parallel. They have the party that's identified, the command that they're intended to follow, and then a very important motivation of why they would do that. Now that's particularly true in each of these relationships. What you see is that one party is the following or the obeying party, and the other party is the leading, the direction-setting party. And that's important as we begin to understand how the household really relates to each other. So you have the wife who is the following party, following toward her husband as is fitting in the Lord. Husband, the leading party, loving and not being bitter. Clarify what that means particularly. No motivation toward the leader there. Second one, children, command, obey your parents in all things. Motivation. This is well-pleasing to the Lord. Then the leading party, fathers, don't provoke their children. Motivation, lest they become discouraged. It really is kind of an attendant implication of the first. And then bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh. Here's a manner, not in this way, but in that way. A second command, do it heartily with a motivation. A third command with a motivation. So you can see how that one just kind of really expands in this text. And then he concludes, masters, give your bondservants what is just and fair. Motivation. Knowing that you also have a master in heaven. And what you'll see is that here, this final category where the leader is considered, there's a supreme motivation for the leaders in all three instances. Okay? So that's how it's working. I think you'll pretty quickly observe that the motivation in all of these is something that has been a theme through Colossians, and that is the lordship of Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Children, obey your parents, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Bondservants, do these things, fearing God. Whatever you do, do that as to the Lord, knowing that from the Lord you receive the reward. But he who does wrong will be repaid. Well, who repays? The Lord repays. And then masters, know that you also have a master in heaven. So you can see very clearly all of the motivation for why the household should interact in this way is exclusively because of the authority of Jesus Christ and our service to him. So in most of the cultural household codes, a lot of these relationships would have been quite common to delineate how they would live towards each other. But this code is distinct from all of the other cultural codes for a few of these reasons. What it commands the leader to do is not just to lead, but how he should lead, the manner of his leadership. And then for all of them, whether you're primarily following in this relationship or you're primarily leading in the relationship, both of them are ultimately motivated by their worship for Jesus. And that brings us back kind of to full circle to the middle of chapter 3, where he had said that we put on the new man who is renewed in the knowledge according to the image of Christ who created him, where in the new man, this new humanity, the church, there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised nor uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. So while many of these relationships exist, and there are implications to them, in the new humanity, in the new man, Christ is everything. He is our master. We are his servants. So in the question of subservience and authority, there we all sit together as servants of Christ, and he stands above us all as our master. And that's really the way that this text is played out. Its primary point is that motivation for, once again, as verse 17 said, whatever we do in word or in deed, that everything would be done in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Let's pray, seek God's help, and then look at some of the details of the text here. Father, we thank you for this opportunity once again to hear from you, to look into this beautiful epistle written by one of your faithful servants, by Paul. Thank you for the theological arguments he has been developing through your Spirit. We ask this morning that, while a simple text is ahead of us, the point is already spoken, that now you would begin by your Spirit in us a meditation on this truth, thoughtful reflection on our interaction with one another, particularly at home, where perhaps the truth of the gospel is tested and under fire more than any other place. Give us understanding of what your word has to say and grow us as you have promised. Continue growing us into the image of Christ. We trust that you will finish that work as you've sworn to do. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Because of the connection that we had last week with Philemon, there's a very practical application of some of these truths. Remember that Paul sent back Onesimus, this disobedient servant, a bondservant. Onesimus has since been regenerated. He's since been saved and is now a brother. And so the priority of relationships has dramatically shifted from servant to brother. And Paul sends Onesimus back to Philemon with encouragements, admonitions, even encouraging Philemon to embrace him as he would embrace Paul himself. Because of that previous consideration and the connection to slave or free in chapter 3 and doing everything in the name of Christ, we're going to consider this first, since it was last on our mind. We'll look at the bondservants and masters, and then move in reverse order toward the more intimate relationships. You can see that they move in that order of nearness. Paul begins near, a little bit less close, and a little bit further away with marriage, children, and then servants. And we're going to go in reverse order this morning because of that consideration. So a few words of clarification. We could spend really the whole time talking about what the Bible says about slavery and servants. And it's a really big topic and certainly a hot one in our culture today. So I just wanted to make a few points of clarification and then encourage you, if you are able to be here Wednesday night, we are going to go ahead and listen to a lecture that develops this more broadly. And I hope that that will be an encouragement to you. If you're not able to make it, let me know and I can send it to you. But a few notes, a few really important notes of clarification. Philemon and Onesimus and the many other master-servant relationships in the church are dramatically different than the evil that our nation called slavery. It's not the same relationship as what we know when we say master-slave. Well, that instantly conjures images in our minds of America's tainted past. So an important point is that this, particularly in the Old Testament, and it develops into the New, is that this servant-master describes a relationship between two people. A relationship more than a class of people. This describes really the leasing of one's own work, perhaps even to the extent of one's own life in exchange for some provision by the master. So servitude was a social obligation, and a very common one, of which everybody took part. Everyone, historically, in the Old Testament, and even into the New Age, not our New Age, into the New Testament, to even the Greek and Roman world, everyone was a servant. The question is, to whom or is your service rendered? Right? Who is your master? And historically, you have even the king is a servant. Well, who's he a servant of? He's a servant of the divine. He's a servant of God. And everyone else is a servant of the king. And underneath even all these servants of the king, there are more delineations of service. But everyone is a service. There's various other structures, but we must understand that this is not like an incredibly foreign thing that you think of, well, all of these people don't have masters, but this class of people do. Everyone's a servant. And that's important to the context in Colossians because Paul makes that argument. Every single one of us is a servant. Many would read this passage as an accommodation to the culture. You say, this was not right whatsoever, but the Christians, because of the cultural trend, were going to do something immoral. They're going to participate in an immoral practice in order to not cause significant rifts, that they would let some of the theology of the gospel be the thing that stands apart rather than some of these other cultural practices. And one of the things Paul's arguing is like, well, no, we're going to have the theology stand first, and if that has an implication in a servant-master relationship, and it does, then we will live it out freely. So the New Testament here and in Colossians is not accommodating the culture. It stands on the New Testament ethic. It stands in truth as it ought to stand. So how does the New Testament approach this master-servant relationship? Well, certainly they did live in the world, but they were not to be of the world. So what implications did that have on servant-master relationships? How about this? That this would be dramatically played out, particularly in a house-church situation, that the saint, consider Philemon and Onesimus. Philemon, this man who has the house, he is the master. The church meets there. And Onesimus is his servant. And they have that relationship toward each other all throughout the week. But when they gather, when the church is assembled, the relationship has dramatically changed, has it not? That he doesn't treat Onesimus as the other, Colossian masters would treat their servants, and not just on Sunday, but I mean, it's played out visibly in front of everybody on a Sunday, that the same place where they had practiced master-servant relationships is the same place that they practice loving, equal brotherhood relationships. That's dramatic. That's very countercultural. That Philemon, when they gathered together, would greet Onesimus with a holy kiss. No other Colossian master would do that to his servant, right? That a Jew would approach a Gentile and greet them with a holy kiss. That's not how things were supposed to go. That they would love each other as Christ has loved them. Well, certainly from peer to peer, but not across some of these social boundaries. And so you see increasingly the impact of that text in Colossians 3. It said, no, these three things have all been made secondary. Christ is all and in all. And we'll see that played out in the call to all of the leadership positions. So, bondservants, how should they respond? And I think that we are faithful and true to apply this as closely as we can would be to our employee-employer relationships. They are not identical, but there is some sort of voluntary service that's being rendered in order for something from the master. And so we as Americans particularly love our freedom and our autonomy and our ability to, I'm going to move from this workplace to that place, and you're free to do that. But there is some sort of obligation. If you're to be paid, if you're going to be provided for, you will render your work. You will render your service. And these broad characteristics would be true of our work and of our leadership in the employee and employer relationship. So consider that in your mind as we walk through this. 3 commands for the bondservants, and they're very strong. He says, obey in all things your masters, according to the flesh. There's the qualification. They are your fleshly, human masters, not your heavenly, eternal, divine ones, praise God. They are your human masters, though. And so he says, obey in all things. There is this sort of universal nature to their obedience. Now, in each one of these 3 relationships, the one serving is Paul never intends for him to have this wholesale service even toward immorality, toward anti-God activity, not in that regard. But anything that they ask that is within the moral laws of God, we would do freely, joyfully. Yes, I will obey. I'll follow. And he says first that first motivation is not even in a fake way. Not only when they're looking, not with eye service, meaning when the eye of the master is toward the servant. Yes, he's working diligently, he's working hard, he's sweating. The master turns away, and the servant kicks back. And he relaxes, and he grabs his drink. And we see this a lot in our workplace too, don't we? Perhaps even practice that at times. And he's saying not in that sort of a way, because remember, you're not a pleaser of men. Your master is not your master. You would do this sincerely because you fear God. Oh, so what? Here we go. Your master, your true, the one whom you owe your allegiance to, is the divine. And is there ever a time that his eye particularly would not be upon you? No. And so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all in the name of Jesus. And so this fear of God, it's a beautiful concept. It's something that even in the months to come that we're planning on delving into, hopefully even into next year, looking particularly at Proverbs and how the fear of God plays a very crucial role there. But suffice to say for this morning that we would be motivated by the beauty, by the supreme and lavish generosity, and just this abundant generousness, as well as this magnificent power, this unparalleled position that God has. All of these things of who he is and what he's done are at the forefront of our minds. And it captivates and motivates and moves us sincerely. Okay, so obey in all things, not ultimately for the master, but for the master. And whatever you do it heartily. So here's this wholehearted, whole-souled, all of you is poured into this activity, diligent, disciplined, energetic, a true service. Once again, why would we work in that way? Why would we give of ourselves in that way to someone who's not ultimately the boss of me? Because we do it to the Lord and not to men. Why would we do it to the Lord and not to men? Because who is ultimately the one who gives us our paycheck? Where is our true inheritance? Who is the one that has reserved for us everything, the riches of glory, right? Union with Christ, an eternal home. Who has that? From the Lord we will receive that reward of inheritance. And so we work heartily now in the structures he has set up with joy, with humility, with everything that we have. And then this third one is actually an imperative, and he says, serve the Lord Christ. You see some wrongdoing. This could go either way as far as who the one who's done the wrong is. In verse 25, Is it the servant that's done the wrong? Well, Onesimus had done the wrong. That's certainly true. So contextually, I think we're fair to go there. It also seems that as he's talking to the servants, there's an encouragement that ultimately their master is God, is the Lord Jesus Christ. And so even the master who would do wrong would be repaid as a poor under master. And he says, remember, and this goes back even to our perspective on this third category, perhaps of forgiveness, of how we should interact with even an unrepentant, like someone who has done wrong to us and is not confessing. Well, we will commit them to the just judge. We will commit them to the master, according to Romans 12. We will give vengeance to the true king. And so in all of this, I think you can see the theme. He delves into it more, he reiterates it, but it's really the same heartbeat 3 different times. Obey in all things because you fear God. Work with everything you have for the Lord because he's the one who has your inheritance. Serve the Lord Christ because the one servant or master who has done wrong is not ultimately for you to decide. It is God who will repay, and he will do so with no partiality, meaning, that leads us right into the instruction for the masters, he will be just and fair and be without discerning of persons. So there's this encouragement, and I would say application for each of us as workers, perhaps particularly for those who are in the employee status. Work for God. Ultimately, which means that you render to your employer joyful labor. God is observing. Work diligently. Work honestly. Work with good stewardship principles. And therein, our labor becomes an act of worship, more than just a drudgery, more than just something that we do in order to get money in order to live. Okay? Now, masters, on the other side of this social equation, this would not have ever been found in a cultural code of conduct. That the leaders, the ones with authority, the ones that everyone's looking to, the ones that have freedom to do what they want to do and to command and to wish and to will. He says, you give your servants justice and equity. You treat your employees in a way that is fair, in a way that is right, in a way that reflects the divine. This goes back very strongly to Old Testament codes. It's something we've seen throughout the minor prophets very extensively, that the leaders in the culture, the leaders in the community, are intended to pattern the divine's laws. And so they are not fattening their own waste. They're not, increasing their own storehouses at the expense of other people, which is the tendency of one with power to do. He says, no, you be fair, you be just. And supreme statement for all of the leaders as we work backwards through the text, knowing this, that you also are a servant, that you also have a master. And he's not, you have this contrast, the fleshly master here, and then the heavenly master there. So you have an eternal, divine king. That should motivate you to be a wise, generous, fair, kind, human master. Let's work backward in the text. These two pairs really summarize what we would call the household today, right? A husband and a wife, and then their children of the fathers, particularly in verse 21. So let's consider children and fathers. Children, the command to you all, and I would encourage your ears to be open at this point, young ones, is to obey your parents in all things. This is essentially identical. It's the same word and same pattern of words that's used even of the servants. There's a very strong connection that you have toward obedience, toward doing that which your parents have called you to do. Now, who's in view here? Any child? Aren't we all children? I think he has primarily in view here children in the home. The parallel passage in Ephesians 6, chapter 4, includes that you would raise these children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So it seems to be that while there is particularly this, it's not master-servant, but a leader-follower relationship. While that leader-follower relationship is strongly intact, the encouragement for the young ones, obey your parents in all things. It's a specific command, and it means exactly what it says. Whatever your parents call you to do, so long as what they call you to do is not disobedience to the divine, you obey them. Why? Because God wants you to. Because God said so. The motivation in each of these subservient relationships is like a silver bullet, ethically speaking. You say, well, I don't really like it. Well, I don't really want to. Well, it's getting old, and I think children, particularly as you do get older, as you work into your teen years, this becomes increasingly difficult because autonomy wants to be flexed, and rightfully so. And there is this slow-moving shift, isn't there, from do as I say to now, hey, you need to make these decisions. You need to have these responsibilities. And so we're moving towards that. But even those teenagers probably still hear, but as long as you're in my house, X, Y, Z, right? So children, despite the difficulty, despite some of the frustration, despite even the failure of your parents, in none of these relationships is the call to obedience dependent upon the other party. Children don't obey because their fathers aren't provoking them. Neither do fathers not provoke their children because their children are obeying. Wives aren't submitting to their husbands because their husbands love them. Husbands aren't loving their wives because they're submitting to them. No, we have individual, standalone commands for every party. And you're responsible for obeying these commands. And so, children, as young as are in the room, all the way to those still at home in their teenage years, obey your parents in all things. This is what is fitting in the sight of God. It's like the first part of Colossians 1 when he said that he's praying that we would be filled with the knowledge of his will so that we would walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him. This is you walking worthy of the Lord, is obeying your parents. Just like the masters, you'd be encouraged to do so when eyes are on you and when eyes are not on you. When it's a joyful command, when it's a drudgery, when you feel like it and when you don't, when you think you know better than them and when you don't. I know that it would be hard and it gets tiring. We all were there at one point in time. And you'll have your moments to make big decisions and to go your own way. But now is the time for obedience. Fathers, and again, this would never be found in a secular code of conduct. Fathers, don't provoke your children. It's interesting that he just identifies fathers here. I think probably primarily because he's talking about headship in each of these situations, the final human one who is responsible, and that would be dad in the home. Though you'll note that you obey parents, okay, so it's not at the exclusion of mom. This is very similar to Proverbs. The father's the one speaking, but he would call to the son to also embrace the teaching of his mother. So fathers, don't provoke your children. What does he mean here? Don't parent in such a way that is irritable, that is embittering, that would cause your children to disdain your leadership, that would discourage and bring them low constantly, where they would feel like they could never do it right. That's not the intention of the divine Father, so it's not the intention of a human father. That we would be very careful to be generous and gracious, understanding, willing to learn of your child and even from your child, and that your pattern toward them would be strong and gracious. One of the things that happens with too overbearing, difficult parenting is that it sets the hearts of the children away from the lives, the passions, the desires, the loves of their parents. I think each of us have seen it. Probably some of us have experienced it. A discouraging, provoking father. And so here, I think I would primarily encourage fathers towards this. And it's maybe a little silly to say it in this way, but this is one of my favorite sports quotes of all time. And it is this, that hearing improves with praise. And there's something to that that's inside of this text, that it's not always negative. It's not always chastening. It's not always coming down. It's not always correcting, which is easy to do with young and immature people, isn't it? Particularly when you have this responsibility. And so he's saying, no, have a gracious disposition. Praise them. Look for the good. Look for grace. Look for what they're doing well. Acknowledge that, and that will give them ears to hear you. Paul practices this in the book of Colossians, or Corinthians. As we think of the book of Corinthians overall, it's a pretty, corrective book. You're doing a lot of things wrong, and that area is wrong, and that area is wrong, and this area you need to shape up. Pretty much everything in the church is in shambles, and he's correcting, building, straightening, reorganizing. But he begins with some of the highest words of grace in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And he says, you have everything you need. You are completely equipped. And he trusts the faithfulness of God to grow them. And he's very upbeat in those first few verses, and then he dives right into parenting. So I'd encourage you toward your children, see grace, see evidences of grace in them, and say them out loud to them, lest they become discouraged. Finally, we have this nearest of relationships, in fact, so near that God describes it as one relationship, right? Oneness. A wife and a husband. It's interesting here, this is very similar to, this whole text really is very similar to 1 Peter, the end of chapter 2 and into chapter 3 that we preached on not too long ago, not too many years ago, I suppose. But Paul doesn't spend time here articulating or arguing in favor of gender roles in marriage. He assumes it. And for the sake of even time this morning, we'll assume it too. But these are unstated in this text, but universal, undying, unchanging, unmovable, built into the design of humanity relationships, roles. So, yes, God designed marriage not just with two biological sexes in mind, but with responsibilities associated with them. The husband is intended to be a humble and a peaceable leader. And the wife is intended to be a humble and a peaceable follower. It's as practical as it is beautiful. So let's fill in this framework a little bit with a brief discussion about what it means. This highly controversial submit. And if you want a further description of it, then do go back and see the 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, I think. There would be a sermon that we preached not long ago on the web, but we'll review some of the high points of that, what submission is and what it isn't. Submission would be to place oneself under in recognition of an ordered structure. So everyone, again, this is similar to what we said at the very beginning about in relation to bondservants, that a lot of people, all society has subservient relationships. All over the place. We all do it. Men and women, boys and girls, young and rich, or old and young, rich and poor, weak and strong, beautiful and ugly. Everybody has these roles of submission, okay? So it's not by any stretch isolated as something that only women are called to do in the New Testament. Nevertheless, is it true isn't it true, that following is an extraordinarily vulnerable and an easily misunderstood, taken advantage of idea? And so, what is this submission in a covenant union? Well, first, this is voluntary and not enforced. So the husband is not the police of a wife's submission. Once again, he has a responsibility that we'll look at in a moment to love and not be harsh. That's his job. And her responsibility is to practice this following relationship. So it's voluntary and not enforced. Secondly, it's limited, not unlimited, meaning that this is not a feminine and masculine thing. This is not women to men. This is a wife to her husband. This is a covenant union submission. It also does not mean that someone is inferior. Submission denotes nothing about one's ability as a human being. Now, the Greco-Roman culture articulated the opposite. They articulated this notion, here's a quote from their writings, that the woman was by nature inferior to the man because she lacked the capacity for reason that the male had. Hang on, it gets even better. She was ruled rather by her emotions and was as a result given to poor judgment, immorality, intemperance, wickedness, avarice. She was untrustworthy, contentious, and as a result, it was her place to obey. That's kind of what we're talking about. There were codes of conduct culturally that also said, wives follow, but here's why. And it's very in your face, it's wrong, it's immoral, this is not at all how God thinks of people. Nowhere does Paul or Peter or the rest of the word teach that women are inferior to men, that they're intellectually substandard, that they're more prone to any sort of wickedness. No, that's not at all the intention. It's a design. It's a societal design that God has brought together for a purpose. His treatment of women as image bearers, and he gives them high value and dignity and respect, and that should inform our own perspective as well. Now, a few other quick notes. This submission, I think, is best described probably in our words today because of other associations with submission, would be a willingness to follow. It's following is really what it's describing in this relationship, I think, in our current vernacular. It's a joyful agreement to God's design. Not saying, yes, dear, not being a pushover, not agreeing to everything, not being unquestioning, not being seen and not heard, nothing like that. But instead, you are counselor, supporter, helper, voice of wisdom. You agree with him and disagree with him. And when he leads well, the burden of following diminishes. And when he leads poorly, the burden of following increases. This is something that Peter calls husbands to have in their minds as they lead their wives, this vulnerability. So there's a lot more even that we could say, but ultimately, the question is, why would we do that? Why would wives be called to follow their husbands? Same reason the children are called to obey their parents. God said so. God wants this to be the way that it is. He has a design, and he's playing it out in his new humanity. And so this is his call, that this is what is fitting in the Lord. This is what befits a woman of grace. This is what befits a woman who fears the Lord, is that she joyfully follows a broken human for the purpose of glorifying her eternal master. Then husbands, not necessarily in response, but parallel or contrary to the wives, this calls for husbands, once again, this would never be found in a secular code of conduct. You love your wives. You give yourselves to them. You pour out your energies on their behalf. This is highly Christological, is it not? That the leader would give himself after the pattern of Christ with this active and unceasing care for her well-being as his own. That's striking. A husband who truly loves his wife more than he loves his own body, that's Christological love indeed. And it would be far easier to follow that sort of a husband than one who loves himself, right? Which is true of those in leadership. We're prone to care for ourselves and to view those under as instruments toward the leader's end, right? And that's not the Christological pattern of leadership. That's not his model. That's not what Jesus himself demonstrated. He loved those who followed him, and he gave himself for their good. So husbands, give yourselves to your wives. You could input from the end of, or the beginning of chapter 4, because you are a member of the bride of Christ, and you have a husband who is in heaven, right? This Christological figure, this metaphor of marriage. We are servants of Christ as well. And he says, and don't be bitter towards them. Now, this bitter, you may have some other translations that render it a little bit differently, and probably a little bit better in this case. The word is bitterness, but what he's communicating here is that you make life bitter for them. Don't be harsh. Don't be critical. Don't be condemning. Don't be domineering, demanding, barking, cutting, critical. Don't live like that toward your covenant companion. She's a co-inheritor of grace. You love her and you give yourself for her and you create an environment of grace and kindness. So all of these relationships have impact, very practical impact on us. And we see, I think in the argument of Colossians, that the centrality of what we might call the new home, okay, if this is the household conduct, this new home, that plays a central role in this new human, this new humanity, this new life, which is Christ. So our lives as a whole, these are lived out unto the Lord primarily. That even the moments of submission to human authorities are moments of submission to God. That moves each of these relationships, whether it's marriage or parenting or employment, that moves all of those categories into the category of worship. Our marriages are an act of worship because they're lived out to our Master. Our parenting and growing up as a child, these are acts of worship because they're lived out before our true Father. Our work, how we interact with our employer or our employees in this subservient relationship, that is an act of worship. And every one of them are done with the very clear eye of God constantly on us. The eye of the Lord runs to and fro throughout the whole earth. And so submitting parties, whether it's wives, children, or employees, joyfully follow broken authorities for the sake of your perfect authority, the Lord Jesus Christ. Leading parties, lovingly lead these human followers after the pattern of Christ, remembering that you are a servant too. And we need to understand that every deed from every one of us is in view here. That Paul's ultimate point is just that. Verse 17, the transition verse. That whatever we do, in word or in deed, that we would do it in the name of, for the sake of, to the glory of, the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him.